Marcus Hale and Dominic Crowe were once allies, but decades of betrayal and revenge turned them into the deadliest enemies Raventown had ever seen, igniting a gang war that would leave the city in ashes. Please subscribe and share for daily new update of gang crime story and watch till end. Ravenport was a city that never truly rested. Even when the streets looked calm, something dangerous moved beneath the surface. During the day, glass buildings reflected sunlight, people rushed to work, and traffic filled every road. At night, the same streets changed their face, sirens echoed through narrow alleys, shadows stretched across empty sidewalks, and fear quietly entered neighborhoods that once felt safe. Most residents sensed that something was wrong, but few understood how deep the problem had grown. For years, Raventown had lived under an invisible balance of crime. Gangs existed, but their borders were respected, and violence stayed controlled. That balance slowly collapsed without warning. Murders began appearing in areas that had never seen blood before. Cars were found burned near abandoned warehouses. Entire families packed their belongings and left overnight. News channels reported these events as isolated incidents, but detectives knew they were connected. A hidden war was forming, piece by piece. Police files revealed a troubling pattern. Victims were not random. Many had links to underground businesses, illegal transport routes, or secret financial networks. Some had criminal records, while others were clean citizens who happened to be in the wrong place. Witnesses rarely spoke. Cameras were destroyed or mysteriously malfunctioned. Fear had sealed the mouths of the city. Those who knew the truth understood that speaking meant disappearing. The city's east side and west side felt like two different worlds. On the east, crime moved quietly. There were fewer shootings, but money flowed through fake companies and silent agreements. On the west, violence was loud and public. Gunfire erupted in parking lots, bars, and street corners. Bodies were left behind as messages. These two styles of crime had coexisted for years, but something had changed. Boundaries were crossed, and patience ran out. Hospitals reported an unusual rise in late-night emergency cases. Doctors treated gunshot wounds without names, and victims vanished before sunrise. Funeral homes handled services with sealed coffins, and no public records. The city council demanded answers, but even officials felt powerless. Rumors spread that powerful figures were pulling strings from the shadows, protected by money and fear. Residents adjusted their lives to survive. Shops closed earlier. Children stayed indoors. Streets once filled with laughter turned silent after sunset. Every passing car felt suspicious. Every knock on the door brought anxiety. Raventown had not fallen into chaos overnight. It had slowly been strangled by secrets. What no one realized yet was that this growing violence was not random. It was the beginning of something far more organized and deadly. Two forces were moving toward a collision that would tear the city apart. The war had already started, even if the city had not fully opened its eyes to it yet. Marcus Hale was not born powerful, but he learned early how power worked in Raventown. He grew up in a neighborhood where survival depended on awareness, patience, and knowing when to stay silent. His childhood was shaped by empty refrigerators, broken schools, and streets ruled by older men who decided who was protected and who was forgotten. Marcus watched carefully. He understood that violence alone never lasted, but intelligence could build something permanent. In his early 20s, Marcus entered the criminal world quietly. He avoided street fights and avoided attention. While others chased reputation, he studied systems. He learned how illegal money moved through fake businesses, how records were cleaned, and how loyalty was purchased rather than demanded. People underestimated him because he spoke less and observed more. That weakness turned into his greatest strength. By his early 30s, Marcus controlled the East Raventown Syndicate. Unlike traditional gangs, his organization looked almost invisible from the outside. There were no loud displays, no unnecessary killings, and no public threats. His power was hidden inside contracts, shell companies, and trusted intermediaries. Drugs, weapons, and cash moved smoothly through the city without drawing headlines. Law enforcement struggled to connect him to any crime. His name rarely appeared in reports, yet his influence was everywhere. Marcus demanded discipline. Members who caused chaos were removed quietly. Mistakes were not punished with rage, but with permanent consequences. This created fear without noise. Many in the East Side believed Marcus brought stability. Crime continued, but streets stayed calm. Businesses operated without interruption. Violence stayed controlled. To outsiders it looked like peace, but beneath it was strict control built on calculation. What made Marcus truly dangerous was his long-term vision. He did not want quick money. He wanted influence that could not be challenged. He invested in real estate, transport companies, and political campaigns through hidden channels. Decisions in city offices, often unknowingly, benefited his operations. Judges dismissed cases due to missing evidence. Inspections were delayed. Everything moved according to plans set months or years in advance. Yet, Marcus carried a secret weight. His rise had required sacrifices that never left his mind. Old alliances had been broken. People who once trusted him had vanished. He told himself it was necessary, but the past followed him quietly. Every step forward was built on choices that could never be undone. As his power grew, so did his confidence. Marcus believed control meant safety. He believed silence meant loyalty. He believed his system was untouchable. What he did not see was the shift happening beyond his territory. Forces driven by anger, not patience, were growing fast. The balance he depended on was cracking, and the calm he built was standing on fragile ground. On the west side of Raventown, order was never valued the way fear was. The streets were louder, rougher, and ruled by reputation. This was where the Iron Vipers were born. They started as a small group of aggressive street criminals, but their growth was rapid and violent. While other gangs moved carefully, the Vipers moved fast, taking control through intimidation and sudden attacks. Their presence spread like a warning signal across the city. Dominic Crowe emerged as their leader, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the most ruthless. His past was marked by loss, failure, and years spent watching others rise while he fell behind. He believed mercy was weakness, and restraint was a lie told by cowards. Under his leadership, the Iron Vipers became a symbol of chaos. They did not hide their crimes. They wanted to be seen, heard, and feared. The Vipers rejected the old rules that had kept Raventown stable. Territory meant nothing to them, unless it could be taken by force. They attacked supply routes, robbed storage houses, and assaulted anyone connected to rival networks. Their methods were brutal and unpredictable. Bodies were left in public spaces, and graffiti marked areas claimed by violence. Every attack was designed to send a message that no one was safe. Unlike Marcus Hale's silent operations, the Iron Vipers thrived on attention. Media coverage fueled their reputation. Each headline strengthened their image. Younger criminals were drawn to the gang's raw power and fast money. Recruitment surged as fear turned into admiration among those who felt ignored by the system. The Vipers grew too quickly for anyone to fully control. Money flowed in through stolen shipments, extortion, and underground fight operations. It was spent just as fast on weapons, cars, and loyalty bought with fear. Discipline was enforced through public punishment. Members who failed were made examples of. This kept the inner circle obedient but unstable. Paranoia spread within the gang, creating tension beneath the surface. As their influence expanded, the Iron Vipers pushed closer to the east side. They crossed lines that had been resected for decades. At first, the moves seemed reckless, but there was a pattern hidden inside the chaos. Attacks targeted key routes and storage points, disrupting the quiet systems that had kept rival organizations powerful. It was a direct challenge to anyone who believed control came from silence. City officials and police underestimated the threat. They viewed the Iron Vipers as another violent street gang that would burn out quickly. They failed to see that this group was not seeking survival, it was seeking dominance. The West Side had become a breeding ground for a new kind of war, one fueled by anger rather than ambition. And as the Iron Vipers advanced, the collision with the east side became unavoidable. The moment the war truly began, most of Raventown did not understand what they were witnessing. What first appeared to be a tragic accident on a crowded highway quickly revealed itself as something far more calculated. A transport truck lost control during evening traffic, crashing into multiple vehicles and causing a chain reaction of destruction. Flames spread across the road, and panic filled the air. By the time emergency crews arrived, several people were dead. Investigators later uncovered evidence that the crash was no accident at all, but the opening strike of a gang war. Within hours, retaliation followed. Safe locations that had operated quietly for years were suddenly attacked. Warehouses burned, hidden routes were blocked, and long-trusted networks collapsed overnight. Each move was precise and intentional, aimed at damaging the enemy's foundation rather than chasing public attention. What made the situation terrifying was how quickly the violence escalated. Attacks were no longer isolated events, they became daily occurrences. Raventown's neighborhoods transformed into battlegrounds. Streets, once busy with nightlife, emptied after sunset. Businesses shut down without explanation. Residents learned to recognize the sound of gunfire and the glow of fires in the distance. Police scanners filled with non-stop reports of shootings, arson, and disappearances. Hospitals struggled to handle the flood of emergency cases, many involving victims who arrived unconscious or without identification. The war followed no clear pattern. Some nights passed in uneasy silence, only for chaos to erupt the next morning. Trusted members of both sides vanished, leaving behind no trace except fear. Money transfers failed. Weapons shipments were intercepted. The city's underground economy fractured as alliances shattered under pressure. No one knew who to trust anymore. Law enforcement launched aggressive operations, but every move seemed delayed or misdirected. Raids hit empty buildings. Surveillance cameras failed at critical moments. Evidence disappeared before it could be logged. It became clear that corruption and fear had weakened the system meant to protect the city. The gangs were not just fighting each other, they were outpacing the authorities at every step. Media coverage intensified, labeling the conflict as the deadliest gang war in the city's history. Images of burned vehicles and taped-off streets filled screens nationwide. Officials promised action, but residents felt abandoned. The city's confidence crumbled as violence became normal. What made this war different was its purpose. This was not random brutality or territorial pride. Each strike carried intention, aimed at dismantling the enemy completely. It was a war designed not to win ground, but to erase the other side entirely. And as Raventown burned, it became clear that the worst was still ahead. As the violence dragged on, cracks began to form inside the East Raventown Syndicate. Marcus Hale noticed the changes before anyone else. Operations that had always run smoothly started failing without clear reason. Convoys vanished along routes that were supposed to be secure. Accounts were frozen just hours after being moved. Safe locations were discovered with frightening accuracy. These were not coincidences or lucky guesses. Someone was feeding information to the enemy. At first, Marcus suspected outside surveillance. He ordered internal audits, changed communication methods, and shifted routes. None of it worked. The Iron Vipers continued striking with perfect timing. Each attack landed exactly where it hurt most, avoiding traps and ambushes with ease. The pattern pointed inward. The enemy was not breaking in, they were being invited. Trust inside the syndicate dissolved quickly. Long-standing members began watching each other. Loyalty, once assumed, became fragile. Small mistakes were treated as signs of betrayal. Fear replaced discipline. People spoke less, avoided meetings, and erased digital traces of their involvement. The organization that thrived on silence now suffered because of it. Marcus began quietly narrowing the circle. He reviewed years of records, tracing access logs, financial approvals, and route changes. The deeper he went, the clearer it became that the traitor was not a foot soldier or a recent recruit. Paranoia spread faster than violence. Trusted lieutenants disappeared overnight. Some fled the city, while others were removed in silence. Each disappearance weakened the syndicate further, disrupting chains of command and delaying responses. The Iron Vipers took advantage of the confusion, seizing territory and destroying assets with little resistance. Meanwhile, Marcus struggled with the personal cost. Every decision felt heavier. Years of careful control were slipping away. He realized that his greatest strength, secrecy, had turned into a weakness. The closed structure that once protected him now hid the traitor perfectly. Federal investigators watching the chaos noticed the same pattern. Attacks aligned too well with confidential syndicate activity. Someone was bridging both worlds, providing information while remaining invisible. This realization raised the stakes. The war was no longer just about gangs. It was becoming a national concern. As Marcus closed in on the truth, he understood a harsh reality. The betrayal was not just operational, it was personal. The traitor knew his habits, his timing, and his limits. The war had shifted direction. What began as an external threat had become an internal collapse, and once loyalty is broken at the top, survival becomes almost impossible. The truth did not surface through gunfire or betrayal on the streets. It emerged slowly, pieced together from old records, sealed files, and forgotten connections. Federal agents reviewing the chaos in Raventown began to see a history that stretched far beyond the current war. Names that once appeared unrelated started forming a pattern. At the center of it were Marcus Hale and Dominic Crowe, two men who seemed like enemies but shared a past buried deep under layers of crime and silence. When federal pressure closed in on that empire, Marcus made a decision that changed everything. He quietly fed limited information that weakened the structure without fully exposing himself. The collapse that followed was massive. Dozens were arrested, assets seized, and the empire was erased almost overnight. Marcus walked away with his identity protected, free to rebuild elsewhere. Dominic did not. He lost his position, his protection, and everything he believed was his future. Dominic escaped the arrests, but his life was destroyed. He spent years hiding, watching others rise while he remained trapped in survival mode. Every loss hardened him. Every memory of that collapse fueled his anger. He blamed one man for everything, even without proof. That belief became his purpose. When Dominic returned under the banner of the Iron Vipers, his actions were no longer random. The attacks on the east side were carefully chosen, aimed at disrupting systems Marcus once controlled. This was not just a gang war, it was revenge delayed by years of patience and suffering. As the truth came together, the war took on a new meaning. The city was not witnessing a battle over territory. It was watching the final chapter of a conflict that began long before Raventown became a battlefield. Two men shaped by the same criminal past were now destroying everything around them, to settle a score that should have ended years ago. The shocking truth exposed how history never truly disappears in the criminal world. It waits, and when it returns, it does so with devastating force. The final phase of the war arrived without warning, hitting Raventown harder than anything before it. Violence no longer followed strategy or territory. It spread like fire, consuming everything in its path. Entire blocks were reduced to ruins after coordinated attacks turned buildings into ash. Emergency services were overwhelmed, unable to respond fast enough as chaos unfolded across the city. Sirens became a constant sound, blending into the background of daily life. The Iron Vipers began to collapse from the inside. Their rapid growth had created weak foundations. Power struggles erupted as Dominic Crowe tightened control, eliminating anyone he suspected of hesitation. Fear replaced loyalty. Members turned reckless, acting on impulse rather than instruction. This internal instability made them vulnerable, and law enforcement finally found cracks to exploit. Federal agencies launched the largest coordinated operation in the city's history. Surveillance that had quietly been building for months was activated all at once. Financial networks were frozen. Transport routes were intercepted. Warrants were executed simultaneously across multiple locations. The sudden pressure left no room for escape. Dozens were arrested within hours, and the Viper's supply lines collapsed overnight. On the east side, Marcus Hale faced his own reckoning. His once controlled empire was falling apart. With trust shattered and resources depleted, he made the decision to disappear. Fake identities, hidden funds, and offshore connections were activated in a final attempt to survive. For years, he had planned for every scenario, believing escape was always possible. What Marcus did not expect was the final betrayal. The same silence he relied on now worked against him. Someone within his shrinking inner circle saw opportunity in his downfall. Information about his escape routes reached investigators at the worst possible moment. Surveillance closed in quietly, cutting off every option without a single shot fired. As arrests mounted and assets were seized, the war burned itself out. There was no dramatic victory, only exhaustion and loss. Dominic Crowe vanished during the chaos, leaving behind a broken organization and unanswered questions. Marcus Hale was captured far from the city he once controlled, his empire reduced to evidence files and sealed indictments. Ravenport emerged from the violence, changed forever. The cost was visible everywhere, in burned buildings, empty streets, and lives permanently altered. The deadliest gang war in the city's history ended not with triumph, but with collapse. Power that took years to build was erased in weeks, proving that no criminal empire survives its own shadows. When the violence finally stopped, Raventown felt unfamiliar even to those who had lived there their entire lives. The silence was heavy, not peaceful. Streets, once filled with sirens and flashing lights, now stood empty, as if the city itself was recovering from trauma. Burned buildings remained untouched, surrounded by yellow tape and unanswered questions. The war was over, but its presence lingered in every corner. Courtrooms replaced crime scenes. Over the following months, sealed indictments were opened, revealing the scale of corruption that had allowed the war to grow. Officials, business owners, and hidden intermediaries were exposed as part of a network that protected crime for years. Evidence showed how money had moved quietly through the city, shaping decisions without public knowledge. Many residents were shocked to learn how deeply the system had been compromised. Survivors struggled to rebuild. Families returned to damaged neighborhoods, uncertain whether safety had truly returned. Businesses reopened cautiously, some permanently changed by loss. Children who grew up during the war carried memories of fear that no rebuilding project could erase. The city offered programs and promises, but healing moved slowly. The disappearance of Dominic Crowe remained one of the war's darkest mysteries. Some believed he fled the country. Others suspected he never escaped the final chaos. Without proof, his fate became part of the city's mythology, a reminder that not every story ends with closure. His name faded from headlines but stayed alive in whispers. Marcus Hale's trials brought another kind of reckoning. Documents revealed how carefully crime could hide behind order and discipline. His calm leadership had fooled many into believing stability meant safety. The court exposed how silence had been weaponized, turning neighborhoods into controlled zones without resistance. His fall became a lesson studied by investigators nationwide. Ravenport slowly moved forward. New leadership emerged in law enforcement. Reforms were introduced to prevent another hidden war from growing unnoticed. Surveillance improved. Oversight increased. Trust, however, was the hardest thing to rebuild. People learned that danger does not always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wearing the mask of control. Years later, the city still carried scars, but it also carried memory. The deadliest gang war in its history became a warning passed down through reports and documentaries. It proved that crime rooted in silence can be just as destructive as violence fueled by rage. And in Raventown, that truth was written not just in records, but in lives forever changed.